Hello, everyone. Welcome to Conversations with Vegan Women Leaders. I'm your host, Katrina Fox, and I'm delighted to introduce our guest today, Nivi Jaswal. Nivi is a connector at heart. She builds strong and passionate teams inspired to deliver socially responsible projects with high community impact. A former Unilever executive, she brings 15 years' experience in international marketing, brand management, and corporate strategy in consumer goods, life sciences, and the media and research industry. Nivi, who was born and raised in India and now based in Boston, founded the Virsa Foundation, which brings together professionals from diverse specialties to design and deliver climate-conscious, plant-powered community projects with a focus on addressing chronic illness, encouraging emotional well-being, immune resiliency, and fostering creative and artistic expression among women of colour in underserved communities. She's currently leading an ethnographic research program called Divinity, which focuses on low-income, nutritionally underserved women of colour in the US. And Nivi also brought together the Divinity Women's Coalition that is calling on the US administration to pivot to a plant-based economy. And you may have seen the media coverage and the petition, #PlantPowered Kamala. Welcome, Nivi.
Thank you so much, Katrina, and I'm floored, to hear that amazing introduction. Thank you.
Oh, you have got such an interesting, when I say resume, I don't just mean professional resume, although that's obviously very impressive, but just you as well, just your experiences and what you're doing. And I know other people have commented on your energy and your passion. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. So I'd love to kick off with, tell us a little bit about your time growing up, because you were brought up in India. Tell us a bit about your time growing up there and how you believed it shaped you today. Because obviously, as we've had conversations before, India is a patriarchal culture. So is the West, of course, but maybe there's some differences there. So I'm kind of curious about your experiences, particularly as a young girl growing up in India and how that's shaped who you are today.
Yeah, thank you for asking me that question. I grew up in India in actually a couple of different places, and believe it or not every part of India is patriarchal. Specifically, the northwestern part tends to be highly patriarchal. That's where originally my family's from. But when I was growing up, the first 5 years of my life were spent in northeastern part of India, and the northeastern part of India tends to have, several matrilineal indigenous cultures and so on. And both my parents were anthropologists at the time and were serving at the Anthropological Survey of India. And I just had this wonderful childhood surrounded by different types of, cultures, microcultures, indigenous cultures, and mainstream cultures, multiple dialects and different languages. And I just feel very fortunate. And after the first 5 years, my family moved back to the northwestern part, specifically to my home state of Punjab, and I grew up there, and it was actually it was a beautiful childhood, but it was also a very difficult circumstance for my state when I was growing up. So the state was under president's rule at the time, growing up in the 80s and the 90s. We did not have a chief minister of our own. We didn't have, our own legislator. And basically, the central government controlled it. And there was a lot of secessionist and insurgency, riddled issues and a lot of domestic terrorism and so on. So that was... something that really shaped my view, definitely around geopolitics, and my dad and my mom both had an opinion about it, being anthropologists. So a lot of our dinner table conversations were very intellectually charged, and I credit a lot of my understanding in formative years of some really serious, complex issues that the world faces even today, and that India is facing even today, and how they might have come about. So those were some of the contexts and events that shaped my childhood.
Okay, so I'm learning. I love learning. I know because you and I have been working together with Divinity, and I'm learning more and more about you every day almost, and it's wonderful. So that makes sense now. To we'll talk about how you've moved into doing what you're doing, but that makes a lot of sense. Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. Now I know you and I touched on this as well in a conversation. Can you talk to us about, because when we think of, I think when people in the West think of India, we think maybe the caste system and what you mentioned, something called colorism. What's been your experience, given the kind of work that you're doing now, working with marginalized communities and communities of color? What's your experience, or what can you tell us kind of briefly about that in India at the moment, and how you experienced it, whether you've seen any changes having grown up?
That obviously is a really complex and complicated, subject when we talk about the caste system in India, or colorism, as many have, called it, and it's linked to it as well. But one has to really take a step back and understand that the caste system was actually, it grew up as a stratification system, a socioeconomic stratification system, which is essentially division of labor. So it might be anachronistic at this point in time. It really wasn't back when, in ancient Indian times, it was created and instituted to ensure that there was a warrior class, and there were priests who had certain tasks to do, and so on, and then there were farmers or traders, and then there were some other people who would do some other duties. Now, as is true for any system, it is for any human system, it's prone to corrupt and devolve into something else other than what it was meant for. And over the centuries, the Indian caste system has actually turned into a really exploitative, discriminatory system. When we start to think about colorism in that context, there's a Sanskrit term for the caste system, obviously, and it is called Varnashrama Dharma. And it really is composed of three words: Varn, Ashram, and Dharma. And the first one means category, but it can also denote color. And the second one is, like a category again, or a class. And the third one is duty. So your duty, and depending on the category or the class that you were born in, and somehow also linked to the color that you had, and clearly skin color, and so therefore colorism is in some way, some scholars argue, is embedded in the caste system. Did I personally experience the caste system or colorism? I just didn't. I was probably, in a really highly academic environment, and in a home environment where probably a lot of these discriminatory practices, I was sheltered from them.
Mm-hmm.
Did I see them outside of, my family, my nuclear family? Did I see what the impact was on some other people? Of course I did. And in my work, you've mentioned, in my work, even before the nonprofit work, one of the big brands that I worked for, unfortunately, actually continues to exploit, colorism in India and in other parts of South Asia and Africa. And they're a large brand of personal care, creams and lotions and so on, and they're a major skin lightening brand.
Right.
So it's really interesting, because the work that I'm doing at this point is 360 degrees, different from how it was when I started out. And at that point in time, I just didn't realize that sexism, patriarchy, colorism, exploitation, the caste system, they're all very complicated, and they're part of the same nexus. And that nexus shows up in different ways, and it has a particularly detrimental impact on women and their socioeconomic mobility, both in terms of marital prospects and employment or education prospects and so on. And it's terrifying to see that in some, nooks and corners of South Asia, the system continues to impact women.
Got it. Thank you. Now, you have, I believe, traveled to 45 countries and you've lived in 6. You're now based in Boston. Why have you chosen the US as your adopted home for now?
Well, my husband's American, for one.
Oh, okay. That's makes sense.
Yeah. And I also used to work for a med devices company that was headquartered in Boston specifically, and then that got me to this part of the U.S. More often than others. So that
Cool. Okay. Excellent. Now, you've got as we just discussed, you've got a very robust corporate career in brand management, marketing. What were some of the best things? Because I know often with particularly social justice movements and advocacy movements, we think of, the corporate world as, the evil, the big bag. And to be fair, I think a lot of those companies, the big multinational companies, are rightly kind of called out and critiqued for, what you've even mentioned, some of the exploitation of people, animals and planet. But I would love to know what was some of the best things, what were some of the highlights of your corporate career?
I think clearly in the corporation and the corporate world, it fosters a lot of discipline, and it teaches people on the go, on the job, on the run. Every single day you're learning something. How you form teams, what is your own style of leadership, a lot of those things. And also I think it teaches people fiscal discipline and complex project management and scale and operating at scale, and especially if you work for blue chip companies that believe in investing in their employees and developing employer brands and have talent strategies that are really well thought through. And they invest in people not just professionally, but also from a skills standpoint, but also personally from a self-development standpoint. And I guess that can make them very attractive to talent. And that attraction, along with the money and the prospect of climbing the corporate ladder, it prevents a lot of people and well-meaning people, from leaving and choosing to do what they want to do. And they sometimes just receive corporate purpose as an implied personal purpose, and probably don't even think about what their personal purpose could be if they didn't have the cocoon of the corporation around them. So there's lots and lots of amazing things that I was exposed to, and my ability to do consumer research in more than 47 countries or 50 countries, or perhaps even more than that, and lead some really, really high dollar projects happened because of that.
Yeah, it's interesting you say about that cocoon. And like you say, when it's a high flying career, very well paid, all the benefits, etc., it can be, it's a big decision to make that leap and to, turn your back on that and go and do something completely different. Like, for example, starting your own nonprofit. So why did you leave?
I left because I got very sick, and both physically as well as I was just sick of appropriated corporate purpose. And I just felt that there was something that was missing, and I couldn't understand what was missing until I took the blinders off. And it was important for me to step out of the system to be able to understand and assess and evaluate the system for really truly what it is. And it, me feeling unwell became an excuse for me to say, I got to take care of me. Therefore, I need to take a sabbatical. I'm not going away forever. I will come back because this is all that I know. And I'm working for some awesome teams and awesome companies and awesome brands. But little did I realize that a 6 months of a sabbatical would very quickly turn into 6 years. And at the end of it, I would be this avowed vegan activist, no less, being, against the very brands who I used to think were highly purposeful and helping, planetary health and public health, which they clearly are not.
I love that you shared that. And I think that was an important point where you said you have to step out of the system in order to be able to objectively evaluate. I mean, that relates to me when I had a job, and it was a dream job. I was like working for the LGBTIQ press here, and there were aspects of it that I loved, but like there were also aspects that were just like really full on. I ended up with 2 frozen shoulders, and, you know, and obviously the kind of the management were, you know, quite abusive to us, you know, to the journalists and the staff. And I remember when I left and then I started doing some freelancing, and people were just really nice, you know, like saying, "Oh, that's great work, thank you." And I was just like, I remember being shocked. And then I thought, I shouldn't be shocked, like, because you just kind of train yourself to kind of expect something that's, you know, kind of negative. It's only when you step out you think, oh my God, that it had some great aspects to it, but boy, that was quite toxic, like what went on. So I love that you shared that. And I know you touched on, you said you got sick. Can you tell us a little bit about your health issues and your health journey?
Right. So, you know, I've shared this story several other places as well, and I'll keep it short in case viewers have heard it or read about it before. So this was March 2015, and up until then, I considered myself fairly fit. I was not obese, but, you know, I was 35 years old, and I felt that things that were starting to happen, and I was starting to, you know, feel some aches and pains, that it was just part and parcel of growing older. And I was in Hong Kong, and I finished a workshop, went back to my hotel room, and I found myself, you know, on the ground, about on the floor, 30 minutes later. And that wasn't a, you know, nice experience at all. And I freaked out. I went back to Singapore the following morning. I was based in Singapore at the time, and I was diagnosed with a slew of different illnesses, including prediabetes, hypothyroidism, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and so on. So I checked myself into a hospital, and I stepped out, and I was, you know, branded a patient, and I did not identify with that label. And I started, and that precipitated that sabbatical, and I started looking for answers. And the first and the most immediate answer was, okay, I got to keep doing my ketogenic diet even more religiously. And number two, this must be stress, and this must be long haul air travel, and this must be not meditating enough or not spending enough time in the gym. So I went and spent a month in New Zealand, climbed a couple of glaciers, and, you know, North Island, South Island, and even hit Stewart Island. And I wasn't vegan at that point, so enjoyed my bluff oysters and so on. And then I realized that no, you know, there was more to it than just any of those things. And I chanced upon the China study, the Mastering Diabetes program, and a couple of other, you know, coaching programs and so on, and got on the bandwagon, and turned whole foods plant-based soon after in 2018. So it took me 3 years, I have to say this, because I was really married to the whole keto science and marketing.
Interesting, isn't it? I'm glad that you found the China study. It's such a groundbreaking piece of work, and I love hearing how people came to it, because I love the fact that you described yourself earlier as a vegan activist, but I know it took you a while to do that. You embraced the whole food plant-based for your health, and then gradually you got exposed to the you know, the animal exploitation side, and the environmental aspects as well. And now you started to use the word vegan as well as whole food plant-based, which is fantastic. Now, just on the subject of health, and I read your really moving blog that you did for Main Street Vegan on the fact that your father passed away last year. You weren't able. He was in India. You couldn't get there. You couldn't be there to comfort your mother. And I believe obviously you couldn't attend a funeral. And the funeral, I was so shocked and sad, was carried out by police officers because of the whole COVID situation. So obviously several layers of grief there. And I'm just wondering, however much you feel comfortable, what you can share about that and how you're handling all of that.
So my dad, yeah, I mean, it's tragic, and you know, it's taken me months, and probably it is going to take me years before I can, you know, talk about it at any length without, you know, tearing up or choking up, or so I apologize in advance if that happens. But I'll try to stay, you know, brief. My dad was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes in 1992. He was around the same age as I was in 2015 when I got my diagnosis. So I just felt that everything like chronic illness and so on, and diabetes especially, was genetic, and that I was going to catch that infection sooner than later. Anyway, so because of advanced diabetes, even though my dad turned whole foods plant-based, oil-free, a month after I adopted a plant-based diet, and he was able to get off dialysis. My mom didn't have to take him to the hospital anymore for dialysis. His markers started to improve, but obviously because of chronic illness over a long period of time, he was the perfect target for the coronavirus. And we tried our level best to keep him secluded and so on, but it turns out that in the medical facility where he was, there was someone, an asymptomatic person who basically, got in contact, and probably the food or so on. And when he was diagnosed, my mom was diagnosed too. Both of them were infected, and I have a younger brother, who's based in Vancouver, but I, had the consent and power of consent. I was like, after my mom, should my mom not be able to take care of my dad, it was me next in line. So I moved them to a hospital, and to two different hospitals, because the category of risk assessment was different. My mom was category 1 and my dad was category 3 because of the underlying issues that he had. And as I mentioned in my blog, things went out of control pretty quickly. He had to be intubated, and he had to be on a ventilator and so on. We tried to get him the best technology. We even got him cytosorb technology. I was like really hoping against hope. But 4 days later, we lost him. And as you mentioned, because of COVID-19 situation, and there's just so many myths around it too. If there is a person who's deceased because of COVID-19, there is a myth that their deceased body is infectious too. But that's not the case. So there are some, situations like these where the morgue and the hospital wouldn't hold on to the body for, as long as some in other situations. So there was really no time for me or my brother to fly. And at the time, I think the Indian airspace was closed for all air traffic and so on. And we had to be, he had to be cremated by the cops because they were responsible for it. And I ended up arranging for my mom to be there for a few short minutes. She identified the body. Another, sympathetic person just held on, held up his phone with WhatsApp video or something, and we were able to see it, my husband and I. And that was just, the saddest day of my life.
Wow. That's heartbreaking. I'm so sorry you had to experience that. And thank you for sharing that both on the blog and in here, just so that people know what's happening and what's going on. I know I was certainly shocked when I read that. Now, as we mentioned, you left your career. You've launched the Virsa Foundation. You're doing some incredible work with the Divinity Research Project. What have been given that you've got this background in corporate, what were some of the challenges you found in starting and working in the not-for-profit space?
Oh, there are plenty,
I can imagine.
I have a $25 to $30 million budget, number one. I don't have a team. I'm me myself. And of course, there's a board of directors, but then I'm the person coordinating everything. To find good talent, you have to be able to pay them. And as a nonprofit, you don't often get good talent because good talent costs money. So what I've had to do is to create my own hybrid solutions where the standards that I have for how to set up a marketing campaign or how to set up social media, how should logos look like and where should they be placed and how visually appealing certain documents should be and others not, or the professionalism that should be part of the conversations that I have with other nonprofits or nonprofit collaborators or coalition leaders at the Divinity Coalition, and including organizing educational workshops for them, because I've been invested into, and you want to pay that forward. So, and that takes a lot of money. So, I guess that the big, I wouldn't say hurdles, but I would say it has been a learning curve, and I've had to create some really hybrid, unique, creative solutions where I can still, utilize a small budget, either raised by myself, or at the Virsa Foundation, or gotten through donors, etc., or indeed some of my savings. But to be able to have the dollar run the extra mile, and to look for boutique solutions, and to also look for fellow vegans who might be from the professional corporate world, and understand why there's a need to discount some of their services for us, at the same time not giving up on the standard that I'm used to. And yeah, so those are some of the challenges. I just have to say that there's, the other challenge sometimes I come across is professionalism, especially when it comes to, financial transactions, or even conversations, setting up conversations, communicating, and so on. The corporation, or anyone, who's been in a professional career, there are fiduciary responsibilities that you have. There's a certain way that you carry on the conversations. Roles and responsibilities are clear in a team, and so on. I just don't think that that's as clear in the small, not-for-profit space. And we're not talking about the Bill Gates Foundation. We're not talking about Oxfam or something, because they're professionally managed. So lack of professionalism is something that I've noticed, and I've learned from it. And I've learned to identify some red, orange, pink, blue flags, and stay away as much as I can, and do my due diligence as I, forge ahead.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up, because my next question was actually going to be about, which will follow on nicely. And we touched on this a little bit earlier in the interview, where about some of the things, the positive aspects, particularly around, I guess, personal growth, personal development, that you were invested in by the corporate companies that you worked for. Can you give a couple of examples of what would be useful in the social justice, in the nonprofit, the advocacy world? Because a lot of people, and I've touched on this with other people I've interviewed for this show, around a lot of activists we tend to work from our wounds, and that can be great as an initial motivator, for us to wake up and go, I need to do something about this. But when we're constantly doing that and not perhaps communicating as well, it can kind of shoot us in the foot in some ways. So I wondered if you could just expand a little bit on that.
Yeah, sure. So I would say that, from a learning management and being invested into by companies, and typically a lot of these companies have learning management solutions, which, straddle basically two areas, to put it simply. One is skills development, that is needed by the employee to work in a high-performing team. And the second one is, cultural sensitivity, consumer sensitivity, and that also sometimes takes the form of self-development and looking inwards and reflecting and understanding, and creating trust with the team that you're working with, evaluating your leadership style, and so on. And when there is that organized, disciplined reflection, or that organized, disciplined skills development, both of those things come together to create a high-performing culture in a lot of these companies. And so I'll give you an example, one of each. One could be, how do you run, how do you run from an idea to launch? How do you run a project? What are the different stages? And what type of conversations should you do at every stage? So when you're ideating, there is a different mindset that you need to have and evoke in people who you're collaborating with. But there comes a time when you want to, talk about, now I want to do a plant-based kickstart, and this program needs 5 things checked off by such days so we can launch it on time and full. And that's when you start doing conversations of feasibility, conversations of decision making, and let go of any ideas that may not have made it, and so there's a set way of launching from idea to conceiving ideas, and then launching programs. So there's that structure and that discipline, which I think that if somehow we were able to bring it to the vegan movement, or to the nonprofits vegan movement, or even for profit, vegan businesses, would actually help a lot. And number two is evaluating, assessing, understanding your own leadership style, examining your privilege. I hear a lot of vegans in the vegan movement at this point who just get really emotional about intersectionality, and there's a big debate that's raging on whether it should be entirely focused on animals, or it should be intersectional, and I think that when people reflect and have or are given an opportunity to do some higher ordered thinking, and ladder up their values, and understand that examining privilege is not optional. It is a sign of evolution, and that veganism is not just about food. It's really about power, and really sort of resetting and repurposing the power balance and the power dynamics that we have, whether it's human power over animals, or it's male power over females, or it's the binary thinking around gender power over people who are non-binary. So it's really be able sometimes those stimuli, and that stimulus is delivered in an organized, disciplined sort of a way, and um, nonprofits, just because they don't have the money to be able to do those and create those learning opportunities either for themselves or the founders, and they operate from the hurt, probably don't have the time, and they don't have the luxury to receive consulting of that nature.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's something that I think is obviously necessary, and it's finding that balance, I guess, in seeing the value in that. And I guess that can be tricky when people are donating, because they want the money to go directly to help either the people, the animals, or the planet for that cause, rather than going to pay staff. I've heard that argument, let alone paying staff to engage in personal development programs, but actually it's really valuable and essential. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. So I want to go on to the work that you're doing. So with the Virsa Foundation and the ethnographic research you're doing, perhaps just explain a little bit briefly about what that is and what you hope to achieve with it. What's your aim with it?
Yeah. So at the Divinity research program, we've got very different types of research ideas at this point. The flagship that we started with was last year in 2020, and this is a qualitative ethnographic program, as you mentioned, and we're exploring food choices and the connection with resiliency, and the type of individuals that we're talking with are women in underserved contexts, and these are women of color, at least 2/3 of them, and we have low-income white Caucasian women, low-income African American, and low-income Latinx women. They're all non-vegan, so we're exploring how non-vegan food choices might hamper resiliency, or and really try to understand the carnist logic that they may have at this point. And it's a very uniquely designed study. I am also a nationally board certified health and wellness coach. I trained at the Mayo Clinic, and so what I've done is, along with my researcher, in addition to creating the design of the research, we've also embedded the Mayo Clinic's method of behavior change, and using motivational interviewing and appreciative inquiry. We nudge people along the project, and we leave them in a space which might trigger cognitive dissonance. And if it's the right opening for them, we say goodbye to them after the research, after the financial incentives. We also give them a little hamper, which has BCRM, and it has Mastering Diabetes resources, and some other vegan and whole foods plant-based resources for them to see if they can really open that door, because now they're feeling doubtful about their food choices. So it's a hybrid. I wouldn't really call it a straightforward traditional research. It is ethnographic, it is qualitative research, but it's also research and activism and outreach and behavior change and nudging, and so on, everything rolled into one. And we're really experimenting with an innovative way of doing research with people who are rarely researched with, because if they're low income, companies don't have interest in going researching with them and understanding product innovation or communication innovation and so on. So
and what do you hope to do with that? So you've done that research, and obviously you've got the activism tied in and everything. What do you hope to do with it, and on a bigger level? Like once you've got it, what do you hope to see happen as a result of it?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Katrina. Exploratory research can have a multi-dimensional outcome, and it can have multiple applications. It can have applications in terms of identifying behavior change models that are racially sensitive, that are sensitive to trauma, for instance. That's clearly one of the things that we're observing, irrespective of color and ethnicity, by the way. And just because of the socioeconomic class, that people just have a hard life, and especially women, with abuse and domestic violence and so on. So there can be just so many different possibilities. At the most basic, it's an insights bank, where if you are a food entrepreneur and if you're interested in corporate social responsibility, no matter how tiny your nutrition startup is, and if you're vegan, this is how you can actually activate some of your portfolio to reach underserved communities, and not just keep looking at ones who will go and shop at Trader Joe's or a Whole Foods market. Product innovation, pricing innovation, and so on. That's just a really basic example. At another level, another point of the spectrum can be trainings. We can talk about racial sensitivity trainings, behavior change model trainings, especially with low-income people, and help people with programmatic content around plant-based kickstarts. So maybe what works with people who have the means of participating in your plant-based kickstart, maybe that's not true for a rough neighborhood. There's very different set of challenges that they have to encounter and compute and factor in on a day-to-day basis. So how do you create those plant-based kickstarts for them? So the opportunities are limitless, and we're in the analysis stage, and I'm very optimistic and hopeful, and soon we can have something to share with the world.
Wonderful. I look forward to that. And of course, you've put together the Divinity Women's Coalition, which has gained fantastic momentum with the petition to Vice President Kamala Harris to go vegan and to spearhead a move towards a plant-based economy, as well as the robust open letter. And there is a story on the Vegan Women's Leadership Network about that, where people can find out more and sign the petition, which is amazing. So I would love to just go on to now to wrap up our rapid fire section, where I'm going to ask you a question and you just answer it in maybe just one or two, maybe one sentence or two, if necessary. If we need to expand, if your answer is kind of like, oh, that's interesting, we can always expand. But it's just basically a little rapid fire section. What's the most courageous thing you've ever done?
Silence.
Take your time.
I had a very bad cold. I know I was supposed to declare that on the form, but I didn't, and I went in for a skydiving round 5 miles above the Earth's surface. And I really paid for it, because if you have a stuffed nose and you have a cold and you try to jump out of an airplane and you're trying to come down, it's going to be painful.
Oh, wow. Okay. I was going to say, so skydiving alone would be courageous enough, but skydiving with a blocked nose, that's extra, extra brave. You talked a little bit about leadership already. What does leadership mean to you, and what style of leader do you believe you are?
I think leading from the front, but bringing people along, and leading by example. That's what leadership means for me, modeling those leadership behaviors. And I think the type of leader, I'm a collaborative leader. I'm not a leader who wants to raise my own flag and like have my face on different things or whatever. Um, I like making other people visible, and I like making their work visible. That just makes me really happy, and that's the kind of leader I am. And I'm a cheerful leader. I'm a cheerleader leader, if that makes sense.
Cheerleader leader. I love that. And certainly in the short time that I've known you, it's only really been a couple of months since I've known you. We've had lots of communications because we've been working together, and I would definitely agree with all of that. I think that's probably why we get along as well, because we just like kind of sharing other people's voices, sharing other people's stories, because it's so fascinating. I think our world, our lives become richer when we do that, when it's not just the same old. So I'm delighted that you've come into this space and that you're doing what you do. What do you love most about yourself?
Forgiveness. I'm able to let go, forgive, move on. That's one. But the second thing is that if I identify something or someone that's toxic, I also, draw a line and not have that fester in my life. So I would say that forgiveness, but at the same time being able to set clear boundaries. Those two things. I've had to learn. These are acquired skills, obviously, but I'm happy with myself that I'm able to do that more than I was.
I love that. And I love that you said that they're acquired skills. I think that's important, because I think a lot of people don't even realize that. They maybe just think, oh, people are born compassionate. You know what I mean? Or they kind of have these natural ways of being. So I like that you've shared that they are acquired skills and you can learn to do that. I think those are things I've had to learn to cultivate as well, particularly forgiveness and even self-forgiveness as well. Has been a big one. So thank you for sharing that. And final question, just tell us a little bit, any kind of maybe one or two key lessons that you've learned throughout your life, whether personally, professionally, that you would like to share with other vegan women leaders.
Listen to your heart. That's number one. If your gut and your heart and all these other vital organs inside of you say that this is not the right thing or it's not the right person, avoid escalation of commitment. Act now. Pull yourself out of that situation or the relationship or the project well in time, so that self-preservation is self-defense, and doing that is really good. And so that's number one lesson. Number two is, I don't want to swear on this interview, but don't take SHIT from people. It's really, really important. And if you see that if somebody is indulging in those behaviors, maintain your integrity, give them dignity, but have an open conversation, bring it out, have it on the table. Don't ghost people. Don't just drop it and let it fester. Have the conversation and then move on. You'll feel much, much better. So evaluate what your conflict strategy is. And a lot of women, I think sometimes we're trained to be conflict avoidant, but that's not constructive. Definitely not for our own sanity, because things fester in here. The third lesson, persistence. And vegan women especially need this the most, because the number of doors we open, probably 90% of them are going to be slammed shut in our face because of different reasons. They may not like us simply because we're vegan. They may not like us simply because we're women, or not binary. They may not like us because we come from a certain culture. They may not like us. So there are just so many different reasons, and they stack up and they become really, really, that list is long. Wait for that 10th door, because when that door opens, that's going to lead to more and more. So don't give up. Persistence is definitely a huge lesson, and that's my message to our vegan women.
Wonderful. I love that. So wonderful positive note to end on. I love all three of those. Thank you so much, Nivi. It's been wonderful speaking with you. As I said, I've enjoyed getting to know you, and I'm really happy to be able to share you with a wider audience as well, because I'm really looking forward to seeing you soar even higher than you already have, which is wonderful. So if you'd like to check out the Virsa Foundation's work, you can go to their website, which is the virsafoundation.org. Is that right, Nivi? Just make sure I've got that correctly. Yeah, and you can find out there's links there to the Divinity research, the Divinity Women's Coalition campaign, and of course the petition, which is at change.org/plant-powered Kamala, and that will be available on the show notes page for this episode. Thank you so much, Nivi. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Katrina. The pleasure's all mine.
Bye, everyone.